Hi, my name is Jordan Green.
And I'm Katie Dunn, and our red project was the Pollinator Gardens at the school forest.
We first began this project on January 25th, and we finished this project on April 2nd. On January 25th, we first discussed our project goals and outlines and determined the objectives for it with Mr. Rentz, our stakeholder at the school forest. On February 12th through the 19th, we began communication with Flat Creek natives up in Perry, Georgia with Greg Lewis, who is the owner of that business. On February 21st through the 22nd, we visited with Paul Sumner, who is the president of the Coastal Plain chapter of the Georgia Native Plant Society, and discussed with him our goals and objectives and sought donations for this project. On February 28th through the 29th, we identified the non-native species that were planted in the school forest garden locations before we started our construction. On March 8th, we met with Greg Lewis from Flat Creek Natives in person in Perry, Georgia, and we received our first donations. On March 14th, we began the construction of the gardens. March 24th through the 30th, we continued the construction of the gardens. And on April 2nd, we finished the construction of all gardens and planted all the plant species that were necessary for the completion.
This project's purpose is to provide the school forest entrance with high-quality pollinator gardens such as the stakeholder requested. Our goal was to construct a garden around each of the signs of the school forest entrance to improve the aesthetics and increase the amount of pollinator species on the property. Another goal was to establish communication and seek donations from our local organizations to provide our gardens with plants native to the southeast. Lastly, towards the end of the project, another goal was created to establish germination of the pollinator species in the pine stem behind the garden.
The stakeholder request for this project is that the garden should contain plants that are native to the southeastern United States. Each garden should measure 6 foot by 8 foot in dimension, with the sign being in the center of each garden. The borders should be constructed with landscape timbers to match the existing borders around the sand post oak in front of the school forest classroom. But before we could begin the construction of either of these gardens, we had to identify all of the non-native plant species that were in each location that were planted from a wild seed flower mix from Lowe's.
During the course of this project, we faced several problems, including finding potential donors that carried and/or sold plants native to the southeast. Once we were able to find Mr. Greg Lewis from Flat Creek Natives in Perry, Georgia, he was able to get us in contact with Mr. Paul Sumner, the president of the Coastal Plain chapter of the Georgia Native Plant Society, which is where we got the majority of our plants from. Our second problem that we had ran into was we had to take into consideration Mr. Renz and the student workers having to cut grass around the borders and like getting around everything. So we had to take 2 feet off of the width for one of our signs and borders, and we turned it from a 6 by 8 into a 4 by 10. So we still had room to like plant extra flowers. And our third problem was we had time restraints. Me and Jordan have different class times, and so we had to figure out when we would actually be able to meet up and like go over stuff that we would have to do for the borders and the gardens.
We first emailed Mr. Greg Lewis explaining the purpose of our class project and requested potential donations of plants to be put into the gardens. After communicating back and forth, Mr. Lewis insisted that we choose 3 plants that will bloom during each time of the year, referred to as 3 seasons planting. Before deciding the desired plants, we first had to examine the conditions and soil types of each of the garden locations. Mr. Lewis later gave us the contact information for Paul Sumner, who is the president of the Coastal Plain chapter of the Georgia Native Plant Society.
The soil type was determined using the NRCS Web Service survey, and we had to choose certain plants that would tolerate this type of soil and drainage class. We also had to choose plants that were able to withstand being exposed to full sunlight for most of the day.
After communicating with Paul Sumner from the Georgia Native Plant Society, we scheduled a day to meet with him and visit his nursery. During our first meeting, we discussed the goals and objectives of the gardens and explained what was desired as an end result. Mr. Sumner described to us everything needed to maintain a newly planted garden, such as plant arrangement, density, and irrigation. He also informed us about the educational garden grant given by the Georgia Native Plant Society to help supply institutional gardens with enough plant species to include in the gardens.
This is the first garden layout design, but later on we had to change and readjust the dimensions and layout to allow the lawnmower to fit between the fence and the edge of the garden border.
Originally, Mr. Rentz had mounded dirt at the base of each sign and planted a wildflower mix to improve the aesthetics of the school forest entrance. Mr. Rentz later asked us to identify each species of plant from the wildflower mix to determine which of the species were annual and which were perennial. After identification of each plant species, we later decided it was best to remove all the plants and mounds of dirt to help with the further construction of the gardens.
We met with Greg Lewis in Perry, Georgia, and we discussed the project goals and objectives. We also described to Mr. Lewis which plant species we decided we would like to include in each garden. Mr. Lewis then explained how the layout of each species in the garden should be arranged and how each species of plants needed to be grouped together to encourage pollinators. Mr. Lewis then explained that by grouping each plant species together, the pollinators would have to expend less energy in traveling between each species of plants. Before we left, Mr. Lewis donated us 15 plants to include in the first garden.
To begin the construction of these gardens, we first went to Lowe's with Mr. Rentz and purchased all the needed materials, including the landscape timbers and the steel rebar. Once we got all the materials back to the school forest, we then cut all the landscape timber and the rebar to the correct sizes needed for each garden. After this was complete, we then leveled the ground around each of the bases of the signs. After we had leveled the ground and ensured that the ground was completely flat for us to lay the borders, we then fixed the garden borders to the ground with the steel rebar. After all of the garden borders were constructed, we had to include cardboard at the base of each garden to help control the weeds from emerging. This was recommended by the Georgia Native Plant Society and Flat Creek Natives because the cardboard is biodegradable and will temporarily suppress the weeds. The worm castings were donated by Mr. Rentz's family farm, which helped us save money from our budget. After each garden was filled with worm castings, we then planted each plant in the correct arrangement requested by the donors.
Here is the list of plants that we received from both Flat Creek Natives and Georgia Native Plant Society, along with the quantity, and in total we received 66 donated plants. This is a photo of all of our donated plants from Flat Creek Natives and Georgia Native Plant Society.
The final budget for this project consisted of all the landscape timbers and the steel rebar that we purchased from Lowe's. We purchased a total of 19 landscape timbers and 4 steel rebar in 10-foot sections. All of the worm castings included in each garden were donated from Mr. Rentz's family farm, and all of the plants that we received for the gardens were donated by Flat Creek Natives and the Georgia Native Plant Society. The total cost for the final construction of each of these gardens was $145.36.
This is the before and after photo of the John W. and Margaret Jones Langdale sign located in the entrance of the Willis Steel Tract. This is the before and after photo of the garden constructed around the working forest and the sustainable future sign located at the entrance of the school forest on the Willis Steel Tract. This is the before and after photo of the garden constructed around the Willis Steel Tract farm property sign. This garden is located within the fence surrounding the classroom and the shop.
Each of the pollinator gardens were successfully constructed and completed, meeting all the requests from our stakeholder and the organizations that donated us the plants. We were also successful in acquiring all donations necessary for this project by establishing professional communication with Flat Creek Natives and the Georgia Native Plant Society. Further communication and relationships are continuing to be maintained through more communication about future goals for each garden and potential ideas for future projects at the school forest and on ABAC's campus. Each plant in the gardens were planted in the desired arrangement by our donors to ensure survival and promote pollinator species congregation around the gardens. Each garden was carefully adjusted to compensate for any complications that arose while maintaining the project objectives. Each of the gardens improved the aesthetics of the school forest entrance. The gardens will also display to the public the natural ecosystem of the coastal plains of Georgia and proclaiming the irrelevancy of the planting non-native species for the purpose of aesthetic improvement.
Future students will be able to build off of our project by continuing the maintenance as well as further construction of more gardens. Another way students can continue this project is by establishing a management plan for each garden. The management plan for the gardens can include how each plant species should be maintained, continually watering of each garden, providing cover for the gardens in the winter, and removal of weed species. Unfortunately, due to the time and budget restraints of this project, we were unable to install an irrigation system. Irrigation of the gardens can also provide students with more opportunities to continue or improve this project. Paul Sumner and Greg Lewis suggested incorporating an irrigation system within each garden to help maintain the plants.
It was also suggested by Mr. Rentz that it would be a good idea to request our donors to become vendors with ABAC. This will allow the school to purchase from the organizations with ease and allow the businesses to be provided with future tax write-off forms. We are currently in the process of trying to establish Georgia Native Plant Society and Flat Creek Natives as vendors for ABAC. We have emailed both Ms. Marshall from the Georgia Native Plant Society and Mr. Lewis the registration submission share supplier job aid form along with the IRS W-9 form completion. More communication still needs to be conducted to establish this relationship, but we are still in the process of hearing back from both organizations.
We would like to thank and acknowledge Mr. Grant Renz, our stakeholder, Dr. Vanessa Lane, our professor, Mr. Greg Lewis from Flat Creek Natives, Ms. Marilyn Marshall from Georgia Native Plant Society, and also Mr. Paul Sumner from Georgia Native Plant.